We can see them very well.
Okay.
And you're audible.
Okay. Okay. So I believe we can start now. Colleagues, we only have an hour. We are taking 4 minutes. I want us to start. We're just introducing immunology. And I believe it's going to be a very short lecture. So it's much better we start and kick-start it off and see what we can do. As the rest join in. The rest who are late will receive the notes when Barbara shares them. So my name is Thomas Semakade, and I'm glad to take you back again through this. And allow me to take you through. So we can use the chat in case you have questions. I'll be able to look at them here. Last time colleagues were complaining about my speed. Let me hope this time my speed is okay and we could hear me much better. So I'll be looking at your charts as they come in as you register so that we could go through. I've decided to mute you all so that some people come in with funny noises that give me feedback here. So allow me to start. Okay. I guess we could start now. So we're introducing immunology. And you realize, if you look at this picture here, if you look at just that picture, immunology is just about your immune system, your body's immune system. Consider it as the defense system that the body is trying to fight against infections that come through. So if you look at just this picture here, you have what we call foreign material. So the first blockade that is there were the non-specific barriers, non-specific, which can be physical, chemical defenses, barriers such as the skin, the mucous membrane, the stomach acids, the lysosome in tears. The body also has different mechanisms like coughing, sneezing, vomiting, and diarrhea. Basically, your body's reaction or immunity. Or body's, hello? I'm getting some feedback. I don't know who is on. Carotus and or Pasco, please, and Willie, please mute yourselves. Okay. Okay, much better now. So these are barriers to invasion. So you have non-specific, which can be physical, chemical defenses. Then you have the innate immunity, which could be natural. For example, the macrophages, the neutrophils, the xenophils, the basophils, and the complement system. Then we have what we call the adaptive immunity, which is the cellular or cytotoxic or the acquired. Others prefer calling it the humoral antibodies. So you realize that all this, what we are going to study through this module, immunology, is basically the body's response towards a foreign material. What are those barriers the body tries to put in place to ensure that they able to fight against the incoming foreign material, so that the body tries to put a resistance against the body's foreign material. So this one summarizes part of what we call the body's immunity. And this is what we're going to look at. So if foreign material comes, it has to meet, look at them as blockades, non-specific physical and chemical defenses. So it meets the skin. If it penetrates and goes further, the innate system is stimulated. The macrophages, the neutrophils, the complement system, as we shall look on further. And if they still penetrate that, the second blockade, you realize that the adaptive immunity or the acquired immunity or the antibodies reactions are actually put in place. So allow me to go on. That summarizes that. So let's look at the introduction. Now the term immunity is derived from the Latin word immunis, which literally means exempt, which was originally referred to as the protection from legal prosecution offered to the Roman senators during their tenures in office. So that's where it comes from. So immunity, the term was adapted subsequently to designate the naturally acquired protection against diseases such as measles or smallpox. It indicated that an individual can develop lifelong resistance to a certain disease after having contracted it only once. So you realize that the cells and the molecular and the molecules responsible for immunity constitute the immune system, and their collective and coordinated response to foreign substances is called the immune response. So if somebody asks you what immunity is, I believe we are in very better position right now to explain it and understand what immunity comes from and where it comes from. Immunis, exempt. That was the original term. Exempting people from, refer to the protection from legal prosecution by Roman senators. And basically, you're looking at how your body, the cells and the molecules responsible for immunity come into play to fight against foreign bodies, as we had already seen in the picture or the pictorial that was before, that consider them as blockades. Allow me to take you back for those who have not been there. So we have looked at this, that a foreign body comes, then we have the non-specific physical and chemical defenses coming into place. For example, the skin, the mucous membranes, the stomach acids, and then we come into the innate immunity, like the macrophages or neutrophils, and then the adaptive immunity that comes into play. Okay. I don't know. Marvin, can you get off? Can you mute yourself? I'm getting some feedback from you. I thought I'd put everybody on mute. Okay, much better. So we have looked at those slides as immunity being an immunus, which is exempting people, just basically designated adapted to designate the natural acquired protection against diseases, indicates that an individual can develop lifelong resistance to certain diseases after contracting it only once, and the cells and molecules responsible for immunity are called the immune response in detail. So the concept of immunity has existed since the ancient times. And one key example is the Chinese custom of making children resistant to smallpox by making them inhale powders made from the skin lesions of patients recovering from the lesions of patients recovering from the disease. So they're trying to stimulate the system. That is what the Chinese used to do. And the first European mention of immunity is recorded by that gentleman, Thucydides, in Athens during the 5th century BC. And how did this person come into play? He was describing plague in Athens, and he wrote in 430 BC that only those who had recovered from plague could nurse the sick. Are you seeing the logic? Only those who had recovered from plague could nurse the sick, because they would not contract the disease the second time. So that is all explaining immunity, and I'm giving you the background how immunity comes through. So once the concept of existence of immunity was established, it was not long before manipulation of immunity under controlled conditions followed. First, we have heard of the Edward Jenner, who in a successful experiment injected the materials from cowpox pustules into the arm of an 8-year-old boy and demonstrated the lack of development of disease after subsequent exposure to smallpox. And this was based on his observation that milkmaids who had suffered from cowpox never contracted the most severe smallpox. So you're realizing people anciently people were appreciating immunity. Already the milkmaids who had suffered from cowpox never contracted the serious smallpox. So Edward Jenner in his experiment decides to inject materials from cowpox pustules into the arm of an 8-year-old boy and demonstrated the lack of disease after subsequent exposure to smallpox. So all this is still the history. So understand that Jenner's technique of inoculation with cowpox to protect against smallpox spread quickly throughout Europe. However, for many reasons, including lack of knowledge and obvious disease targets and their causes, it was after nearly 100 years that this technique was applied to prevent smallpox. Okay. You realize that the experimental there's the experimental work of another gentleman called Emil von Behring and a gentleman, Shibashaburo Shitasako, in 1890, gave the first insights into the mechanisms of immunity, earning them a Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1901. So what these people demonstrated that serum, which is the liquid non-cellular component of coagulated blood from animals previously immunized to diphtheria, could transfer the immune state to unimmunized animals. Since then, immunity as a field of study, immunology as a field of study remains one of the hottest fields that I also anticipate some of you could pursue. One of the hottest fields of research, as shown by the statistics of over 17 Nobel Prizes have been awarded scientists in immunology. Okay. So they allow me to just introduce the innate system. Kindly, Manuel, mute yourself. Okay, thank you so much. The innate immunity, also known as the non-specific immune system, we realize we have what we call innate system, the innate immunity. So it's a non-specific immune system. Allow me just to talk about it briefly. It is basically your first line of defense, which is non-specific to the invading pathogen and rapidly mobilized at the initial site of infection, but lacks immunologic memory. So it's usually your first line of defense. But as of here, it's non-specific. So it basically lacks the immunological memory. And the main function of the immune system is basically to prevent or limit infections by pathogenic microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi. And I want you to realize that recognition of microorganisms and foreign substances is the first event. If the body can recognize them, it's the first event in immune responses of the host. So the body's defense mechanism basically can be innate or it can be adaptive. Others would prefer calling it natural or acquired immunity. And in innate immunity, I don't know if we are still okay up to there. Last time people were complaining of speed. I don't know if it's still very fine with everyone. If please, you can use the chat to let me know in case you have not understood anything. I'll gladly look through to ensure that we are all on the same pace. But it's a short lecture. I anticipated by 5 we should be done. Okay. So I just want to recap. We've already seen immunity, how it has come through. We have looked at the innate system. So you have innate, which is an innate system, the natural acquiring immunity, and then the acquired, which we shall look at later. I'm hearing the speed is too much. The speed is too much, and yet you have time. Samuel, I don't know why you say the speed is too much. I believe I am trying my best to ensure that my speed is okay. You'd want me to flash one by one, then you begin writing. I thought that we'd go through this, and then the slides are sent back to you for you to appreciate them. That was my thinking. Because you may not appreciate everything within the time they have given us. But the good thing is we share these slides with you for you to appreciate. So you just get, in this, you're getting the overview of the whole topic. And then you, as you go back to read, you internalize the process and read deeper. Usually PowerPoints are usually just bullets. Bullets are highlighting what the real gist is supposed to be. Yeah. So just some little bit of bullets for you to appreciate what we are studying about. And then you can do a deep dive later into the topic to appreciate it. I'm trying, actually, thank you so much. I'm trying even to repeat myself so that the speed is okay. Thank you, and you've noted that. So just the innate immunity, let me start from there. Innate immunity is the resistance that an individual possesses by birth. It is an immediate response to the pathogen, but remember, it does not confer long-lasting protective immunity. And the way that somebody can define, so if you define innate immunity, you can refer to as the non-specific defense mechanisms. The non-specific defense mechanisms that come into play immediately or just within hours of an antigen appearing in the body. These mechanisms include the physical barriers such as your skin, the chemicals in the blood, and the immune system cells that attack foreign cells in the body. If you go to that website, you can understand that definition. So basically, these are the non-specific defense mechanisms that come into play. Immediately, they recognize an antigen. So basically, this may not be very clear for you, but when you go back, when I send these slides over and you look through it, you will appreciate it as you read the immunological system better. So just making more, get deeper into the innate immunity. Innate immunity is just naturally present. And it's not due to any prior sensitization to an antigen. And just giving an example of an infection or vaccination. Since it is not stimulated, innate immunity is not stimulated by specific antigens. Innate immunity is basically non-specific because it is not stimulated by any specific antigen. And that makes it, that is the difference it has with acquired immunity. Acquired immunity has to be stimulated. And that's why we say innate immunity is a natural immunity. Okay, somebody could you mute? I'm hearing goats in the background. So innate immunity can be classified as individual immunity. It can be classified as racial immunity. It can be classified as species immunity, which Barbara will make a deep dive tomorrow. And individual immunity is basically denoted as resistance to infection, which varies within different individuals in the same race and species, and it's genetically determined. So one thing you realize, we have different types of innate immunity. I don't want to attempt or trying to preempt Barbara's presentation tomorrow, the other day, but this is basically what she's supposed to talk about. Individual immunity denotes resistance to infection, which varies within different individuals in the same race and species, and it's genetically determined. That's individual. For example, you realize that if one homozygous twin develops tuberculosis, there's a very high possibility that the other twin will also develop tuberculosis, if it's a homozygous twin. But in a heterozygous twin, there's a very low possibility for the other twin suffering from tuberculosis. So we also, from individual immunity, you have what you call racial immunity, which racial immunity, you realize racial immunity is denotes a difference in the susceptibility or resistance to infection among different races within the same species. And for example, you realize that races with sickle cell anemia are more prevalent in Mediterranean coasts, are immune to infections caused by malaria parasites, Plasmodium falciparum. And this is basically due to genetic abnormalities of the erythrocytes resulting in sickle cell sickle-shaped erythrocytes that prevent parasitization by the P. falciparum. So different races, you may have immunity because of your different race. Immunity can be individual, it can be racial. And another thing you realize that similar individuals with hereditary deficiency of glucose 6-phosphatase dehydrogenase are also less susceptible to infection by P. falciparum. So you realize that could be racial immunity. We have looked at innate immunity, or you can have what we call species immunity. Several species immunity denotes a total relative resistance to pathogen shown by all members of particular species. You realize that most of the chicken are resistant. All chicken are resistant to Bacillus anthracis. Rats are resistant to Coenobacterium diphtheria, whereas humans are very susceptible to these bacteria. So chicken have what we call species immunity. And these are all examples of the innate immunity: species immunity, racial immunity, and individual immunity. So I'm not preempting, that's just basically what you should know. Individual, racial, and species immunity are examples of the innate immune system. Well, we have components of the innate immune system. We have anatomical barriers, cells and receptors and complements. And so you realize that the innate system features, it's basically due to the genetic and constitutional makeup of the individual. Prior contact with microorganisms or their products is not essential because it's not non-specific, and it acts as the first line of defense. This one I'm just repeating myself. And the mechanism involved in the innate immunity mechanism involved are present in place even before exposure to the foreign agent, and realize that they are non-specific to any infectious agent, and they do not seem to improve response on repeated exposure. So we have examples that phagocytic cells, macrophages and neutrophils, barriers, we have already seen skins, mucous membranes, and variety of antimicrobial compounds synthesized by the host all play roles in the innate immunity. So this is just an overview. And we realize that the innate immunity includes the barriers to infectious agents such as the skin, the mucous membrane. It also includes many immune components, for example, that are important in the adaptive immunity. For example, phagocytic cells, the natural killer cells, the toll-like receptors, the cytokines, and the complements. And you realize that we have different factors influencing innate immunity. Age is one of them. Age is one of the different factors that influence the innate immunity, because we realize that extremes of age make an individual highly susceptible to various infections, explained in part by the immature immune systems in very young children, and the warring immunity in what? In adults. So age is a very key factor. Barbara will emphasize this tomorrow. Yet Barbara will emphasize that as she's taking us through to appreciate. But then another thing you have to appreciate is that age, very old people are susceptible to suffering more than young people from a disease. For example, pneumonia and high mortality, even and have a high mortality. Even the respiratory infections now, like for the COVID-19 that's available, at first we realized the first strain was mainly affecting adults because of the warring immunity. But I don't know the strains and the different mutations. It is coming to the different ages that where you and I may lie. Deficiency viruses, the cytomegaloviruses and the Toxoplasma gondii, they can cross placental barriers and cause congenital infections. So just understand that. Hello, I'm hearing someone in. Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Okay, let's continue. So age is a key factor that can influence the innate immunity. And I believe we are still together here. Okay, just a minute. Okay. So we've looked at age as one of the factors that influence. Another thing that influences the immune system is the nutritional status. The nutritional status of the host plays an important role in the innate immunity. Both hormonal and cell-mediated immunity are lowered in malnutrition. And we shall see later as you study about the complements in the further lectures, that neutrophil activity is reduced, interferon response is decreased, and C3 and factor B of the complements are decreased in the protein calorie malnutrition. So you realize this as you study about the complement system, that deficiencies of vitamin A, vitamin C, and folic acid make an individual highly susceptible to infection by many microbial pathogens. So we have different mechanisms of the innate immunity, but you realize that the innate immunity of the host performs two most important functions. It kills invading microbes, and it also activates the adaptive immunity. Remember from the first diagram, the first system that comes into play is your innate immunity when a foreign body attacks. Then when it moves beyond that blockade, it stimulates the adaptive response. The antibodies are stimulated. So the innate immunity, unlike the adaptive immunity, does not have any memory and does not improve after re-exposure of the same microbes. So basically, the innate immunity is primarily dependent on 4 types of defense barriers. Anatomical innate immunity is dependent on barriers, on the physiological barriers. It's dependent on phagocytosis, and then it's dependent on inflammatory response. So your innate immunity, which is naturally occurring, is basically dependent on those 4 barriers: anatomic barriers, physiological barriers, phagocytosis, and inflammatory responses. This diagram will, as you get your notes, you will realize that physical barriers can be issues to do with mucus, tight junctions, the defensins, the ciliated epithelial cells, and the mucus that is available. Then we have issues to do with, in the innate immunity, you have the neutrophils, the phagocytes, the macrophages, the pro-inflammatory factors. All those ones are playing a part. And when all that fail, on the left-hand corner, it stimulates what we call the adaptive immunity, where you have the B cell activation, the T cell activation, the antigen-specific antibodies coming into play because of the stimulation of the presence of the antigen. Yeah. Laban, I don't know why you're not hearing anything. Is it happening to everyone? Is it happening to everyone? Are you hearing me? So Laban, I think check your mic. Must be you alone. Okay, thank you so much. Can we continue? Please kindly put in your chat. Okay, thank you so much. So anatomical barriers, we have already spoken about the skin, the mucous membrane, and are the most important components of the innate system. These anatomical barriers act as mechanical barriers, and they prevent entry of the microorganisms into the body. And you realize that your intact skin prevents entry of microorganisms. And you realize that, for example, breakage in your skin due to scratches, wounds, and abrasions can cause infection. Bites of insects harboring pathogenic organisms, for example, mosquito bites, can introduce pathogens into the body and transmit infections. And you may realize that your skin secretes sebum, which prevents the growth of many microorganisms, and which sebum consists of lactic acid and fatty acids that maintain the pH of the skin between 3 to 5, and this pH inhibits the growth of most microorganisms. So you realize that anatomical barriers, your skin and mucous membrane really play a role. And these are naturally occurring, they are part of the innate system. So most of your the mucous membrane forms a large part of the outer covering of the gastrointestinal, respiratory, genitourinary, and many other tracts of the human host. And realize that a number of non-specific defense mechanisms act by basically all of them act by. So you have issues to do with saliva, tears, mucus secretions, which tend to wash away potential invading microorganisms, thereby preventing their attachment to the initial site. Somebody with goats, kindly still mute. It's very good to farm, but kindly mute. Yeah. Somebody is turning to God. Kindly mute. Thank you so much. So these secretions also contain antibacterial or antiviral substances that kill these pathogens. So mucus, as realized, is just a mucus fluid secreted by epithelial cells of the mucous membrane that entraps invading microorganisms. And you realize that in your lower respiratory tract, mucous membrane is covered by cilia, which is basically the hair-like protrusion of the epithelial cell membranes. So all these ones are playing part. And that synchronous movement of the cilia propels mucus entrapped microorganisms from these tracts. From these tracts. And in addition, you realize that the non-pathogenic organisms tend to colonize the epithelial cells of mucous surfaces. So these normal flora generally compete with pathogens for attachment sites on the epithelial cells. So you realize we are talking about just anatomical barriers. The skin and the mucous membrane, and they're all part of the innate immunity. And they're all playing a key role in entrapping, in preventing entry of foreign bodies into our bodies. So we also have physiological barriers, as we already told you. Gastric acidity is one of them. You realize that it's basically an innate physiological barrier to infection, because we realize that very few ingested microorganisms can survive at a very low pH in the stomach contents. And you have what we call lysozymes, interferons, and complements, and you'll realize this later, are some of the soluble mediators of the innate system. And these lysozymes have antibacterial effects due to their actions on the bacterial cell walls. Interferons are also secreted by cells in response to products of viral infected cells. We have studied interferons, we've seen them basically in viral infections. So these substances have a general antiviral effect by preventing synthesis of viral structural proteins. We've also seen in physiological barriers, we have what we call complements, which is just a group of serum soluble substances that, when activated, damage the cell membrane. When you activate them, they damage the cell membrane. Okay. So those are examples of physiological barriers: gastric acidity, lysozymes like interferons, complements. We shall see them later as Barbara looks at them, but they're also part of the anatomic barriers. So we have looked at the skin. I will not go deep inside here. We have looked at sweat, and which is an enzyme that dissolves some bacterial cell walls present in the skin and help protection against some microbes. And lysozymes are present in tears and respiratory and cervical secretions. So the skin also produces a variety of antimicrobial agents, including a protein with antibacterial properties known as psoriasin. It's also produced by the skin. So all these ones are physiological anatomical barriers. I know you read more about this in your lecture, but in the next lectures, because this is what Barbara is also supposed to talk to you about, this was just an overview, an introduction, just to open up your eyes of how the topic is supposed to look like. So all mucous membranes are lined with normal microbiota, which prevent establishment of pathogenic microbes. And you realize that in your respiratory tract, you have mucus that covers the surface, mostly driven by ciliated cells towards the natural orifices, and bacteria tend to stick to this film. And mucous membranes have lysozymes. I'm repeating myself so people to appreciate that. Small microorganisms establish infections by attachment to epithelial cells. If it's not attached, then it cannot enter the cells, but they are cleared by the IgA in these cells. The phagocytes take up microbes that enter through mucous membranes, hence act as barriers to further spread of large number of bacteria. Cough reflexes prevent organisms. When you cough reflexes, they prevent organism aspiration, and nostril hair are also very protective. And we know that also in the GIT you have saliva. In the gastrointestinal heat of the stomach kills many ingested bacteria like Vibrio cholerae. The small intestines contains many proteolytic enzymes and active macrophages. In the adult vagina, we have an acidic pH maintained by the normal lactobacilli, which inhibit establishment of yeasts, anaerobes, and gram-negative bacteria. So those are examples of anatomical barriers and the additional defense mechanisms. You look at them as I share these notes, but I've tried my best to list them out. The skin, sweat, desquamatization, flushing, and organic acids, the gastrointestinal tract, peristalsis, gastric acids, bile acids, digestive enzymes, flushing, defensins, gut flora. In the respiratory airways and lungs, you have mucociliary escalator. You have also factor deficits. Then you also have mucus and saliva and lysosomes in nasopharynx. And in the ears, we have talked about the tears. So basically, that is the adaptive immunity, the innate immunity. So now in this diagram, I'm just trying to show you the difference between innate versus adaptive immunity. In the innate immunity, okay, in the innate immunity, we have looked at barriers, epithelial barriers. We've looked at phagocytes. We also have the complement system. We have the natural killer cells. And that occurs immediately as an infection has occurred. Within 0 to 12 hours, the innate immunity is into play. But once the pathogen or the foreign body penetrates, the innate immunity stimulates the activation of the adaptive immunity. And in the adaptive immunity, you have the antibodies coming into play, the B lymphocytes, the T lymphocytes releasing antibodies, the effector T cells. So the innate immunity occurs before the adaptive immunity. And once the infection is not contained by the innate immunity, is the stimulation of the system to activate the adaptive immunity. And the adaptive immunity is as a result of the penetration. So it's stimulated for the body, it's stimulated to activate the additional defense system. For those of you who started the lecture, I looked at them as blockades. The first blockade as the innate immunity, the second blockade as the adaptive immunity, as the body is trying to prevent that. Okay. So these ones, you realize that innate immunity does not generate antigen-specific protective immunity, it does not rely on specific recognition. Just repeating myself, though it still provides a powerful line of defense. It has both cells and cytokines, phagocytic leukocytes such as the polymorphonucleophile neutrophils, and the macrophages, along with the natural killer cells, are also primary cellular components that combat macrophages. So the invading microbes plus these cells release the complement and the numerous cytokines, and that one was also part of the innate immunity. Okay, so allow me to say part of still, I don't want to go deep into this because Barbara will explain this better tomorrow or the other lecture. Innate immunity has mechanisms. The microbial sensors, the phagocytosis is also an example of innate immunity. The natural killer cells, immune system, the mediator of inflammation, the mast cells, and the gamma or the delta cells. Those are all cells that form part of the innate immunity. And I'm not going to go deeper. You realize that I have slides that explain this, but I will not explain this because it's part of the lecture that my next colleague is going to take you through. So allow me to skip this. I'm not going to look at the microbiome sensors. You'll be looking at them later. And in the next lecture, Barbara will be explaining this so that you can appreciate them better. And phagocytosis. My role today was just open up your thinking about immunology. My role was also trying to explain what the immune system looks like, and once the system comes into play, what really happens, what stimulates what, which system comes before what, innate versus adaptive, which system comes before, what happens in the innate immunity, what happens in the natural, what happens in the adaptive immunity. So I want us to appreciate that that it takes me back to the first part of my lecture, that immunology is not a new concept. You realize that being not a new concept, you realize that, allow me to reshare this for you to appreciate it, because my role was just an overview. My role was just an overview for you to appreciate it and understand the different types, definition of the host defense mechanisms, the practical application of immunology, and just the components of the immune system and the microbial mechanisms of pathology. So allow me to share the first slide so that we can go through it again, because that explains what I wanted us to look through. So this is basically what I'm laboring to explain. This is basically what I'm laboring to explain. So this is what I'm laboring to explain. Foreign body trying to penetrate. It meets what we call the innate immunity, which are the non-specific physical and chemical defenses, the skin, the mucous membrane, the stomach acids, lysozymes and tears. Then it stimulates. Also part of the innate immunity, we have macrophages, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, and the complement system. The adaptive immunity, when this is all occurred, we have what we call the adaptive immunity or the acquired immunity, which is a result of the stimulation.
Excuse me, sir, we are not seeing anything.
Hey, you're not?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let me reshare. I thought I'd shared. Thank you for being alert. Can you see my slides now? Can you see them now? Can you see them? Okay, this is what I'm only laboring. And this is my role today. My role was basically here. My role wasn't to go to do a deep dive into the immunology lecture, but my role was just to explain and open up your eyes towards the thinking of this module. So basically, this is what we are talking about: foreign material penetrating the system. You have the non-specific physical and chemical defenses, which is we have explained this: the barrier, mucous membrane, stomach acids, lysozymes and tears, and all that. All that is part of the innate immunity. Macrophages, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, and monocytes. And when that system occurs, it stimulates the adaptive immunity. And that marks the end of my lecture. I don't know if you have any questions for me. I'll appreciate questions. I'll appreciate any questions.
Excuse me, sir.
I'll appreciate questions.
Excuse me, sir. I have a question.
Yes.
You say the innate immunity is born with you. That means you're with it for most of your time, isn't it?
Yes.
But then somewhere you say it is not long lasting. Yet we are with it all the time. How is that?
No, I thank you so much. Allow me to answer that. I'm seeing somebody asking me at Alex, what was our role? Okay, I'll come to that later. So the innate immunity, I said it's not long lasting. We are born with it. We have it, but it's not specific and it doesn't have memory. For example, if you realize antibodies in the adaptive immunity, you realize that when an antibody is stimulated, the body releases what we call memory cells, which memory cells are part of the acquired immunity. In the innate immunity does not have memory cells or does not keep a memory. That means that if you are affected by a particular pathogen, the body cannot retain, the skin doesn't maintain maybe a memory that once this other infection is trying to come in, it will just naturally try to block it or something. That is what I was trying to mean. I don't know if I've tried to answer you and whether you appreciate it. Innate, yeah, this one is trying to explain to you very well. Innate does not fight for so long. She has explained it very well. Akus Susan, thank you so much. Yes. Any other questions? I'm also reading through your chats. I'm the one who has decided to unmute you so that we can hear. Okay. I've decided to unmute you so that we can hear. I'm seeing 2 hands raised. Yeah, Magala Marvin, please make your submission.
Yes, thank you for the lecture. I was asking trying to get the difference between the natural killer cells, the dendritic cells, and the Langhans cells. I don't know if there is a difference.
Yeah, there is a difference, but allow me not to preempt the next lecture. The next lecture is an in-depth of what we call the innate immunity. I've realized in my slides, I was going deeper into the next lecture, so I decided to cut it short. So allow that to be answered, because it's just a preamble for what is going to happen ahead. So many questions will be answered as we go through the different modules. Next, tomorrow we're answering innate immunity. So everything with innate immunity will come out very clear as we're explaining that. So I'll not tackle that today. Yes, I don't know if it's okay. You can be patient and pack it. This is just the introduction of the lecture. I'm seeing Fribasa Joel. Please make your submission.
Yes, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Joel.
Sir, you talked about, yes, you talked about HIV crossing the placental barrier. Under which circumstances does this HIV cross the placental barrier and cause congenital infections? And please give me some examples of these congenital infections caused when HIV crosses the placental barrier.
Okay, let me just get there. Okay, I gave examples of how it crosses over to the cone. Okay. So you want examples how it crosses over? I'm not come again on that. I'm not checking, not picked it well. I'm trying to rephrase it and see if I've really got you well.
Under which circumstances does this HIV cross the placental barrier? And I just wanted some examples of the congenital infections it causes when it does so.
Okay. Yeah, I think I explained this, that I was trying to explain something to do with age, and I was saying that the immature immune system in very young children and waning immunity in older individuals, fetus in utero is usually protected by maternal infection. Okay, I now try to understand where you get it from. HIV, I think during birth, you realize that mothers during birth, once the placental barrier, how it crosses over, there are mistakes usually made during that process, and somebody can have that crossover. Whereby the fetus is affected by HIV. Maybe somebody else can try to explain this from my side. Anyone who has understood this question. Maybe I'm not getting it very well. Okay, I don't know. I've not explained to you very well. I don't know if I've not answered that very well. But I know we shall get to that later. I'll package that and also look more to understand better.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, can I have that as the last question, because I have another class starting at 5, and I'm ready.
Yeah, this is Mr. Samuel.
Yes. Please come in, Samuel, come in. Please come in. Okay. So otherwise, colleagues, thank you for attending this lecture. It was an introduction. And thank you. I hope you've appreciated that the immunity is a long-time thing that has been there. It's not something that is very new. And it involves, we have looked at the different types of the immune system. And this is part of what we're going to study, what we're going to basically look through in the different lectures. So allow me to stop the lecture here. For other questions, let's look at them in the related modules. This was just an introduction. Give us that introduction and appreciate it. So thank you so much. Allow me to give you part of the evening back.